Part 2, environmental law. We're now talking about federal regulations. And the federal law, the National Environmental Policy Act, creates this thing called environmental impact statements. And what this is all federal agencies must take environmental impact into account when making significant decisions. So they have to prepare what's called an environmental impact statement, which has to be made public, and which the public can challenge if the public can show that the federal government has not properly taken into consideration certain impacts that actions by the federal government will have, and in many cases try and stop the activity by the federal government because of the impact that it's going to have. You've probably read about this in situations. Common areas include animal life being harmed severely by impacts of federal activity. The EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, has to analyze the impact of the proposed action on the environment, the adverse effects of that action, and consider alternatives. Also must look at any irreversible effects that the action might take. A major action involves a substantial commitment of resources. Okay, another law at the federal level that's important to know about is the Clean Air Act. This provides the basis for issuing regulations to control multi-state air pollution. It covers both mobile and stationary sources of pollution. It has been extended by the Supreme Court to include CO2 emissions, and in 2015 the EPA started regulating greenhouse gas emissions from airplanes. Stationary sources. The Clean Air Act authorizes the EPA to establish air quality standards for stationary sources. The primary responsibility for implementing these standards is with the state and local governments. The standards aim to control hazardous air pollutants that are likely to cause death or a serious, irreversible, or incapacitating condition. Hazardous air pollutants. The Clean Air Act requires the EPA to list all hazardous air pollutants on a prioritized schedule. At this point, nearly 200 substances have been classified as hazardous. So the goal of the Clean Air Act is to require major new sources to use pollution control equipment that represents the maximum achievable control technology, or MAC, to reduce emissions. The EPA has issued guidelines as to what equipment meets this standard. Violations, you can see, civil penalties can be assessed for up to $25,000 a day, additional fines, and also potential criminal penalties. Okay, that ends part 2 of chapter 25.